A poor teacher comforts a lost child crying in the rain, unaware his father was the Mafia boss. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold, dreary evening in late November when a light drizzle turned into a steady downpour. The streets were nearly deserted, with only a few late-night drivers hurrying to reach their destinations. Lucy Stevens, a 28-year-old high school teacher, was walking briskly through the wet streets, heading home after a long day of teaching. The exhaustion from the long hours of grading papers and planning lessons was starting to weigh heavily on her. Her feet ached as the water from the puddles splashed onto her shoes, soaking through her thin coat. She pulled the collar up around her neck and quickened her pace. Just as she was about to turn the corner to her apartment building, she heard the soft sound of crying. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the rain pounding against the pavement. She stopped, looking around in confusion, but there was no one in sight. The crying persisted, growing louder and more frantic. Lucy's heart clenched with concern. She glanced around again, searching for the source of the sound. That's when she saw him. A small boy, no older than 6, was standing on the sidewalk, drenched to the bone, his face buried in his hands as he sobbed uncontrollably. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, she rushed over to him. Hey, it's okay, she said softly, kneeling down beside him. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to comfort him as best as she could. What's wrong? Where's your mom? The boy looked up at her, his tear-streaked face pale with fear. He didn't answer at first, just stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. Lucy could see that he was shivering, his small body trembling from both the cold and the fear. She quickly took off her coat and draped it over his shoulders, pulling him close to her in an attempt to warm him. It's okay, you're safe now, she reassured him. I'm going to help you. She gently stroked his hair, trying to calm him down. Where are your parents? Do you know where they are? The boy finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know. I was lost. Lucy's heart broke at the words. A child, alone in the middle of the night, crying in the rain. She couldn't imagine how scared he must have been. She looked around, hoping to spot someone who might know the boy, but there was no one in sight. Her mind raced. Should she take him to the police? The hospital? But she couldn't just leave him out here in the rain, shivering and alone. She knew she had to help. It's okay, you're not alone, she said softly, brushing the wet hair from his face. We'll figure this out. She stood up, holding out her hand to him. Come on, let's get you inside where it's warm. The boy hesitated for a moment. Then, as if sensing her kindness, he slowly reached out and took her hand. Together, they walked to her apartment, where Lucy planned to call the authorities and find out who the boy was and where he belonged. As she helped him out of his wet clothes and wrapped him in a warm blanket, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. Little did she know, this child's father was a man with a dark, dangerous past, a past that would soon come looking for him. After Lucy Stevens got the young boy settled in her apartment, she could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As she prepared some hot chocolate for the child, she watched him silently, his small hands clutching the warm blanket wrapped around him. He didn't speak much, just stared at the cup of hot chocolate, as if unsure of what to do with it. Lucy sighed quietly to herself, feeling the weight of the responsibility that had suddenly fallen on her shoulders. She couldn't understand how a child, so young, could be lost and alone in the middle of the night. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Her heart ached, knowing that the boy must have been out there in the rain for a long time. She needed to find out where he came from, who his parents were, and how to get him home safely. Just as she picked up her phone to call the authorities, a knock at the door startled her. She froze, heart pounding in her chest. It was too late for visitors, and her first instinct was to check on the boy. She crossed the small living room, peeking through the peephole in the door. Standing outside was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit. His sharp features and the icy expression on his face immediately sent a shiver down Lucy's spine. There was something about him that felt dangerous, but at the same time, she felt a strange pull toward him. The man knocked again, more urgently this time. "I know you're in there," he called in a low voice, his accent unmistakably Italian. "I need to speak with you." Lucy hesitated. She couldn't let him in. She didn't know who he was or what he wanted. But the boy had to be his. There was no other explanation. Lucy's heart raced as she glanced over at the child, who was now looking at her with wide, nervous eyes. He had stopped crying, but was still trembling from the cold. She couldn't risk it. "Stay here," Lucy whispered to the boy, then took a deep breath and opened the door. "Yes?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man's eyes immediately scanned the apartment, his gaze landing on the boy sitting on the couch. His expression remained unreadable, but Lucy could feel the intensity of his stare. "You have my son," he said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. "Your son?" she repeated, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "Who are you?" The man looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. "My name is Alessandro Romano," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "And this," he added, turning his gaze to the boy, "is Luca, my son." A wave of shock washed over Lucy. Luca's father was standing right in front of her. The boy's silence, his fear, it all made sense now. But what didn't make sense was the way the man carried himself. There was a sense of power and danger surrounding him that was almost palpable. "I didn't know," Lucy said, her voice steady despite the overwhelming wave of fear. "I just found him outside, crying in the rain." He was alone. Alessandro's gaze softened, but only for a moment. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer. "That's because he's been running from me," he said quietly. "He was taken from me once, and I won't let that happen again." Lucy's confusion deepened. "Taken from you?" she asked. "What are you talking about?" Alessandro's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Lucy could see a flicker of emotion behind the cold exterior. "It's a long story, Miss Stevens," he said, his voice low. "But Luca is not just any child. He is the son of a man who rules an empire of crime, and I will do whatever it takes to protect him." Lucy felt her stomach drop at the words. "An empire of crime?" she repeated in disbelief. The man before her, the father of the child she had been trying to protect, was a mafia boss. She didn't know whether to be terrified or angry. Her instincts screamed at her to push him away, but her compassion for the boy kept her rooted to the spot. "You're not taking him," Lucy said firmly, her heart pounding in her chest. "He's safe here with me." Alessandro's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a brief moment, Lucy saw a flicker of something dangerous in his gaze. "You don't understand," he said softly, his voice cold again. "He's not safe with you. The world I live in doesn't allow for safety. Not for people like him, not for people like you. But I'm not going to hurt you, Lucy. I'm not like that. I just want my son back." Lucy stood her ground, her mind racing as she tried to process everything Alessandro had said. The danger he was implying, the mafia ties, the coldness in his voice, it all felt too much. But she couldn't just hand over the boy. Not after everything she had done to protect him. "I'm not giving him to you," she repeated, her voice shaking but resolute. Alessandro sighed, clearly frustrated but not entirely surprised. "I'll be back," he said, his voice softening. "And when I return, Luca will be with me." He turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced at the boy once more. "I'll make sure you both are safe," he added. "You have my word." With that, he left, and the door closed with a soft click behind him. Lucy stood frozen for a moment, her heart still racing. She didn't know what to make of what had just happened. Luca's father was a mafia boss, and he wasn't going to stop until he had his son back. But Lucy couldn't let him go. She wouldn't. The next few days felt like a blur for Lucy Stevens. After Alessandro's visit, she tried to push the encounter out of her mind, but it lingered like a dark cloud over her every thought. Every time she looked at Luca, sitting quietly in her apartment, she felt a mix of fear and responsibility. She had promised to keep him safe, but how could she protect him from someone like Alessandro Romano? The more she thought about it, the more impossible the situation seemed. Alessandro had made it clear that Luca was his son and that he would do whatever it took to get him back. But Lucy wasn't willing to give up. She couldn't. She had grown fond of the boy, and in the short time since she'd found him on that rainy night, she had come to care for him deeply. The boy had been through so much already. His father was a mafia boss, involved in a world of violence and danger, Yet Lucas seemed so innocent, so fragile. She couldn't let him go back to that life, no matter the cost. But what could she do? She wasn't equipped to deal with people like Alessandro. She was just a teacher. The truth was, she felt out of her depth, but she wasn't about to back down. Her protective instincts kicked in, and she knew that if she didn't act fast, Luca might disappear back into the world Alessandro had promised to protect him from. One afternoon, after school, Lucy was sitting at her kitchen table, trying to gather her thoughts, when her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. You have 24 hours. After that, I will take Luca. Do not try to run. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. It was from Alessandro. She had been expecting this, but seeing the words in black and white still made her stomach turn. She sat frozen for a moment, staring at the screen, trying to find the strength to respond. What could she possibly say to a man like him? She knew he wouldn't stop. Not for her, and certainly not for Luca. But she had to try. She had to find a way out of this. But how? She didn't have the resources, the connections, or the power to stand up to someone like Alessandro Romano. That night, after Luca had fallen asleep on the couch, Lucy made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer. She couldn't keep hiding in her small apartment, hoping that things would somehow resolve themselves. She had to take action. She quickly packed a bag, grabbed her phone, and drove out to the nearest payphone. She had no idea what she was going to do next, but she had to find help. As she walked toward the phone booth, her mind raced. Who could she trust? Who could help her protect Luca from the Mafia boss who seemed to have eyes everywhere? Then, as she dialed the number she hoped might provide an answer, a voice crackled through the receiver. Lucy, the voice said, low and urgent. It was Carmen, her best friend, and a nurse who worked with her at the local hospital. Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you all day. Are you in danger? Lucy felt a surge of relief. Carmen, I need your help, Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible. I've got a situation with a child, and I don't know what to do. His father. He's a Mafia boss, and I'm in way over my head. Carmen's voice was steady but filled with concern. You're not alone in this, Lucy. I've seen things. You know I can help you. Lucy nodded, wiping the tears that had formed in her eyes. She could hear Carmen's calm, steady tone through the phone, and it gave her hope. I don't know what to do, Lucy said, her voice cracking. I can't let him go back to that life. But I'm scared. I don't know how to protect him from someone like that. Carmen paused before responding. We'll figure this out. You have to stay calm, Lucy. Whatever happens, you don't go anywhere without the boy. Do you hear me? You don't trust anyone outside of your circle. Lucy's heart was pounding in her chest. Okay, I understand. But I don't know if I can keep him safe. I don't have the resources. I'm just a teacher. I don't know what to do. Carmen's voice softened. You have more than that, Lucy. You have a heart, and you've already shown the boy you care. That's something money and power can't buy. But now, we need to be smart. We'll make a plan. I'll be there for you, and we'll figure it out together. The words were a balm to Lucy's fears. Carmen was right. She wasn't alone. She had someone who cared, someone who could help her. Thank you, Carmen, Lucy said, her voice breaking. You don't know what this means to me. I know, Carmen replied gently. Just get the boy somewhere safe. I'll help you, I promise. With renewed determination, Lucy ended the call and returned to her apartment. She was ready. She wasn't going to let Alessandro take Luca away. She would fight for him, no matter what it took. She just hoped she wasn't too late. The days that followed were a blur for Lucy Stevens. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. The clock was ticking. Alessandro's warning echoed in her mind, his words cold and final. You have 24 hours. Time was running out, and Lucy knew that she had to act fast. She couldn't let Luca go back to a life that could destroy him. But how could she protect him from someone like Alessandro Romano? A Mafia boss with influence, power, and a willingness to do anything to keep his son by his side. She couldn't fight him with her own strength. She wasn't equipped for this kind of battle. She was just a high school teacher, a motherly figure in her students' lives. But this was something entirely different. She had no choice but to turn to her best friend, Carmen, for help. Carmen was the one person Lucy could count on, the one person who had always been there for her. And now, Carmen was going to help her save Luca. They needed to come up with a plan that would keep Luca safe, and that would buy them enough time to figure out what their next move would be. That night, after school, Lucy met Carmen at the Local diner. The one place where they could talk freely without fear of being overheard. Carmen looked more serious than usual as she slid into the booth across from Lucy. We don't have much time, Carmen said quietly, glancing around before leaning in. But we have options. I've done some digging, and I know a few people who might be able to help. Lucy nodded, relieved to hear Carmen's calm voice. I don't know what I would have done without you, Carmen, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You're my only hope right now. Carmen smiled, though her eyes were full of concern. You don't have to thank me. We're in this together. And Luca, he needs us both. I don't understand it, Lucy murmured. How can someone so young, someone so innocent, be caught up in all this? Carmen's expression softened. Because he's not just any child. His father is a powerful man, and when you're in that world, there are no safe spaces. You either play by the rules or get destroyed. Lucy swallowed hard, trying to wrap her mind around it. She had spent years trying to protect her students, trying to make the world a little better for them. But this felt like something out of a nightmare. What should we do? Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Carmen took a deep breath, then spoke with determination. We need to move fast. We can't let Alessandro get to Luca. If we wait too long, it might be too late. She paused, considering her next words carefully. I've arranged for a safe place. A friend of mine runs a safe house on the outskirts of the city. It's discreet, and no one will find him there. Lucy's eyes widened. A safe house? You really think we can get him there? Carmen nodded. We have to. The longer we stay here, the greater the risk. But we'll have to be careful. Alessandro isn't stupid. He'll be looking for Luca. And once he starts, there's no telling what he'll do to get him back. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what she had just stepped into. It wasn't just a case of protecting a child. It was a fight for survival, for safety, for the chance to escape a world that could swallow them whole. How soon can we leave? Lucy asked, her voice steady now, the fear replaced by resolve. I'll get Luca, Carmen said, her voice strong. You pack your things. We'll leave as soon as possible. Lucy nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. She didn't want to leave her apartment, but she couldn't afford to stay either. Her thoughts kept returning to Luca. How was he doing? Was he scared? Was he even awake? She had promised him safety, but could she really keep that promise? What about you? Lucy asked, feeling a pang of worry for Carmen. Are you sure you're okay with this? Carmen's expression hardened, a glint of determination in her eyes. I'm in this, Lucy. Don't worry about me. Just worry about keeping Lucas safe. As they finished their meal, Lucy felt the weight of the decision ahead of them. She knew there was no turning back now. They had made their choice, and now it was a race against time. As she walked home that night, her mind was filled with thoughts of Luca. She glanced up at the darkened sky, the clouds swirling ominously above. What had she gotten herself into? And would they be able to keep Lucas safe before it was too late? Lucy didn't know, but she knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever it took. She couldn't let Alessandro win. She couldn't let Luca go back to the life that had already taken so much from him. The battle had just begun, and Lucy was determined to see it through to the end. The following days were a blur for Lucy Stevens. She barely slept, her thoughts constantly swirling around Luca's safety. She had promised him that she would protect him, but the fear that gripped her heart every time she thought of Alessandro haunted her. The Mafia boss had made it clear that he would do whatever it took to reclaim his son. Lucy knew she wasn't prepared for the danger he represented. But despite the overwhelming fear, she refused to back down. She had promised to keep Lucas safe, and she would not break that promise. After the conversation with Carmen, the plan was set in motion. Lucy packed up as much as she could, trying to keep her movements steady. Every sound from the apartment felt amplified in the quiet of the night, as if the walls themselves were listening for any hint of danger. As the minutes ticked by, her thoughts kept returning to Luca. The boy had been through so much already. He deserved a normal life, not the kind of dark world his father was part of. Lucy made her way to Luca's room, checking on him one last time. The boy was asleep, curled up under the blanket she had given him. He looked so small, so vulnerable, and Lucy's heart swelled with protective love. She gently brushed a lock of hair from his face, not wanting to wake him, but feeling the need to reassure herself that he was still there, still safe. She had to make sure nothing would happen to him. But in the back of her mind, a new worry crept in. What if Alessandro had already found out about their plan? What if it was too late? Lucy shook off the thought, taking a deep breath. She couldn't afford to doubt now. She needed to act, and she needed to do it fast. Carmen was waiting for her outside. Together, they had arranged to meet at the safe house on the outskirts of the city. It was their only chance to keep Luca away from Alessandro's reach, at least for now. Lucy knew that if they didn't get him out of the city, there was no telling what might happen. She had heard enough about the Mafia's methods to know that they would stop at nothing. "We'll be fine," Carmen had reassured her earlier. "I'll keep you both safe, but you have to trust me." And trust was exactly what Lucy needed to do. She grabbed the last of her belongings, making sure everything was ready. Then, she quietly made her way out of the apartment, her heart beating faster with each step. As she closed the door behind her, she locked it with a click that echoed through the empty hallway. It felt final, as if she was leaving behind everything she had ever known. But she couldn't afford to look back. Not now. The drive to the safe house was tense, the rain pouring down heavily outside as they navigated the winding roads. The streets were nearly empty, and Lucy couldn't help but wonder if Alessandro had already begun looking for them. Every car that passed felt like it could be his, every shadow in the rearview mirror seemed to be a threat. She kept her eyes on the road, but her thoughts were with Luca. She needed to get him to safety, no matter what. As they arrived at the safe house, Lucy's heart felt heavy in her chest. The house was nestled on a quiet street, far from the busy city, surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the light from the street lamps. It was a far cry from the life she had known, but it was safer. She got out of the car and glanced around nervously. There were no signs of danger, but the tension in her body told her otherwise. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though she was waiting for something terrible to happen. Carmen led her inside, her voice calm and reassuring. "It's going to be okay, Lucy. You and Luca are safe here." But Lucy wasn't sure. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. The world she had known, the life she had built for herself, was slipping away. She had no idea how long they would be safe here, or what Alessandro might do to find them. "I don't know how to thank you, Carmen," Lucy said, her voice shaking. "You're doing everything you can. I don't know what will happen next." Carmen gave her a small smile. "You don't have to thank me. I'm doing this because I care about you. And I won't let anything happen to Luca. We're in this together." The door to the safe house shut with a soft click, and Lucy couldn't help but feel like it was closing off her old life. She looked over at Luca, who was sitting quietly on the couch, staring out the window. He was still too young to fully understand what was happening, but Lucy could see the fear in his eyes. He had been through so much already. But as long as she was alive, she would do whatever it took to protect him. The next few hours felt like a waiting game. There was nothing more to be done except wait for the storm to pass. But in the back of her mind, Lucy couldn't shake the fear that Alessandro was closing in on them, and time was running out. She just hoped that when the time came, she would be ready. Days passed in the safe house, but Lucy couldn't shake the sense of impending danger. She had done everything she could to shield Luca, but the fear that Alessandro would find them kept gnawing at her. Every phone call she made, every movement outside the house felt like a calculated risk. She had no idea how long the safe house would be able to keep them hidden. As she sat in the dimly lit living room, watching Luca play with the small toys Carmen had brought for him, her mind was far from calm. Luca, once a quiet and scared child, was starting to adjust to his new reality. The bright smile he gave her every time she walked into the room was a small, but precious relief. He trusted her, and that was all she needed to keep going. She had to protect him, no matter what. Carmen, too, had been a steady source of support, taking charge of most of the logistics while Lucy stayed with Luca. But deep down, Lucy knew the clock was ticking. Alessandro wasn't a man who would be easily deterred. One evening, as Lucy tucked Luca into bed, she heard a faint knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? It was far too early for anyone to be checking in, and the safe house was supposed to be isolated. Carmen, who had been in another room, appeared in the hallway and motioned for Lucy to stay quiet. "I'll check," Carmen whispered, her voice calm but full of caution. Lucy nodded, her breath shallow as she held her own thoughts in check. She had to be prepared for anything. Moments later, Carmen returned with a grave expression. "It's not good," she said softly, her face pale. "I just got a call. There's been a breach." Lucy's blood ran cold. A breach? She echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean? Alessandro knows where we are. His men are closing in. Carmen's words hit Lucy like a punch to the gut. She could feel her heart racing in her chest, but she couldn't let herself panic. What do we do now? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Carmen's eyes hardened with resolve. We don't have much time. We need to leave. Now. Lucy felt her stomach tighten, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. The safe house had been their refuge, their last hope, but now it had been compromised. The only option left was to run. I'll get Luca, Lucy said, quickly moving to the small bedroom where the boy slept. You pack up. We'll leave right now. Carmen didn't argue. She grabbed the emergency bags they had packed days ago and began throwing in anything that might help them survive the night. Meanwhile, Lucy gently woke Luca, trying not to startle him. The boy blinked up at her, his eyes heavy with sleep. We have to go, sweetie, she whispered, brushing his hair away from his face. We have to go now. Luca nodded quietly, though he didn't fully understand. He had grown used to the idea of moving from one place to another in the last few days. But this time, Lucy could see the fear in his eyes. Are they coming for me again? He asked, his voice trembling. Lucy's heart clenched. No, Luca, they won't get you. I'm not going to let them, she said softly, her voice filled with more conviction than she felt. With Luca's small hand in hers, Lucy followed Carmen out of the back door. They moved quickly, slipping through the yard and into the woods behind the house. Every step they took felt like a race against time, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the heavy rain. Lucy kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see Alessandro's men following them. But for now, there was nothing, just the quiet of the night and the rustling of trees in the wind. They walked for what felt like hours, each step more difficult than the last, but they couldn't stop. Finally, they reached a small clearing. Carmen's friend, who had been prepared to help them, was waiting with a car in the distance. It was their only hope for escape, and they had to make it there without being caught. They sprinted toward the car, but just as they reached the edge of the clearing, Lucy heard something. The unmistakable sound of an engine revving. Hurry, Carmen yelled, urging them forward. But as they approached the car, the headlights suddenly flashed on. Two black SUVs pulled up, blocking their way. The men who stepped out were dressed in dark suits, their faces cold and emotionless. Lucy's heart dropped into her stomach as she realized they had been cornered. She pulled Luca close, shielding him with her body. Get in the car, Carmen yelled, but the men were too close. It's over, Lucy, one of the men said, his voice low and menacing. Give us the boy. Now. Lucy's chest tightened. She couldn't let this happen, not without a fight. But before she could react, Carmen pulled something from her jacket. A gun. Back off, Carmen said, her voice steady but dangerous. The men froze, momentarily thrown off guard. But they didn't back away. The tension in the air thickened, and Lucy's mind raced. She couldn't let this end like this. Not now. Take Luca and run, Carmen whispered urgently to Lucy, her eyes locked on the men. Go. Without thinking, Lucy turned and bolted into the woods with Luca in tow. She didn't know what was happening behind her, but she couldn't look back. Not now. All that mattered was getting Luca to safety. They couldn't stop. They couldn't give up. The fight for Luca's future had just begun. Lucy's heart raced as she dashed through the rain-soaked forest, Luca's small hand clutched tightly in hers. The sound of the black SUVs grew fainter behind them, but she didn't dare slow down. The path ahead was narrow and winding, the trees casting long shadows across the ground. Every step felt like a risk. Every rustle in the bushes made her jump. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and determination. How had it come to this? Just hours ago, they had been hiding in the safe house, thinking they were safe. But now, with Alessandro's men on their tail, it was clear that nothing would be easy. She had to protect Luca. She couldn't let them take him back to that life. She glanced down at him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, but he kept running beside her, trusting her to keep him safe. Are we going to be okay? Luca's voice trembled. Lucy squeezed his hand, her heart breaking for him. Yes, Luca. We're going to be okay, she said, her voice firm, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. The woods seemed endless, the trees closing in on them as the rain kept pouring down. She couldn't hear the SUVs anymore, but she knew they couldn't stop. They couldn't afford to stop. They had to find safety. But where could they go? They had no backup, no plan beyond this desperate run through the woods. As they continued to run, Lucy's thoughts raced. She needed help. Carmen had done what she could, but they had no way of knowing how long they could hide. What if Alessandro had people everywhere? What if they couldn't outrun him? The thought was unbearable. She couldn't let Luca fall back into his father's hands. They couldn't go back to that life. They had to keep moving forward. As they reached a clearing, Lucy spotted a faint light in the distance. Her heart leapt in her chest. Was it hope? Or was it another trap? She didn't know, but it was their only chance. Come on, Luca, we have to keep going, she urged him, pulling him toward the light. They pushed forward, the rain still falling relentlessly, soaking them through. The light grew brighter, and soon they could make out a small cabin ahead. Lucy's pulse quickened. Could it be safe? Or was it another danger lurking? But there was no time to hesitate. She had to take the chance. They reached the cabin, and Lucy knocked urgently on the door. There was no answer. She knocked again, harder this time, her heart pounding in her chest. What if there was no one inside? What if they had come all this way for nothing? But then, the door creaked open, and a woman's face appeared. What is it? She asked, her voice wary but kind. Lucy didn't hesitate. Please, we need help. There's nowhere else to go, she pleaded, her voice desperate. The woman glanced at Luca, then back at Lucy, her expression softening. Come inside, quickly, she said, stepping aside to let them in. As they entered the cabin, Lucy felt a mix of relief and unease. The woman led them to a small living room with a crackling fire in the fireplace. It was warm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lucy allowed herself to breathe. Thank you, she whispered to the woman, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. The woman nodded, then took a step back. I don't know how long you'll be safe here, but you can rest for now, she said, her voice calm. What happened? Lucy hesitated for a moment, then spoke. A man, he's been looking for my son. He's dangerous. The woman's eyes widened. Who is he? Lucy swallowed, her throat tight. His father, she said quietly. He's the Mafia boss. The woman's face shifted, her concern growing. Then you're in more danger than I thought, she said softly. I'll help you, but we have to be careful. You need to move fast. Lucy nodded. She knew the danger hadn't passed. She had no idea what Alessandro's next move would be, but she couldn't afford to take chances. They had to stay ahead of him. We'll leave soon, Lucy said, her voice steady. But for now, thank you. The woman nodded, then disappeared into another room. Lucy sat down by the fire, looking at Luca as he curled up on the couch. She had never felt more alone in her life, but she knew she had to stay strong. For Luca, for herself. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the rain pounding harder against the cabin windows. But inside, at least for now, they were safe. As Lucy watched Luca drift off to sleep, her thoughts returned to Alessandro. She didn't know how much longer they could keep running. She didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. Lucy awoke to the crackling sound of the fire in the cabin's hearth, the warmth filling the small room as the storm outside showed no sign of slowing. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was early morning, but she hadn't slept much. Every creak of the old wooden house kept her alert, the ever-present fear that Alessandro's men could find them at any moment, keeping her eyes open. She rubbed her tired face and looked over at Luca, still curled up on the couch. He was fast asleep, his small body rising and falling with the rhythm of his breathing, his innocence untouched by the nightmare that seemed to be closing in on them. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax. For a brief moment, they were safe. But that peace didn't last. Lucy stood quietly, slipping on her shoes and heading to the small kitchen. She needed to think, to plan their next move. As she filled a glass with water, she caught her reflection in the window. Her eyes were tired, her face drawn. She didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. She had gone from a teacher with a modest life to a fugitive, running from a mafia boss who would stop at nothing to reclaim his son. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? She crossed the room, glancing at Luca one last time before opening the door. To her surprise, it wasn't anyone she expected. A man stood at the threshold, his expression unreadable, but there was something in the way he carried himself. Danger, authority. His clothes were sleek, dark, expensive. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. The man didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Luca for a brief moment before meeting Lucy's eyes. "I'm here to help," he said, his tone cool but firm. "I know who you are, and I know what's going on. But you need to listen to me." Lucy stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. "What do you mean, help? Who sent you?" she demanded. The man's eyes narrowed. "Alessandro knows where you are," he said bluntly. "I'm not here to hurt you, but you have to trust me. I'm your only way out." Lucy froze, every muscle in her body tense. "Alessandro knows where you are." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She glanced back at Luca, who was still sleeping. Could it really be true? Could Alessandro's reach extend this far? She hadn't felt this vulnerable since the first night she had taken Luca in. "What do you want?" Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. "I can get you out of here," he said. "But you have to come with me now. The longer you stay, the closer they get." Lucy hesitated. She had no choice. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't risk Luca's safety any longer. But the thought of leaving everything she knew behind, her job, her home, her life, was terrifying. "I can't just leave," Lucy said, shaking her head. "What about the safe house? What about Carmen?" The man's expression softened for a fraction of a second. "The safe house is compromised. Carmen has already been moved. There's no time to waste." Lucy's mind raced. Carmen had been moved? What did that mean for them? What if this man was leading her into a trap? But deep down, Lucy knew she couldn't keep running forever. She had no choice but to trust him. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the fear gripping her heart. The man smiled faintly, then turned to the side. "Follow me. I'll explain everything along the way." Lucy hesitated only for a moment longer, then nodded. She went back to Luca, gently waking him. "Luca, we need to go," she whispered, her voice soft but urgent. The boy rubbed his eyes, still groggy. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice trembling. Lucy knelt beside him. "We're going to be safe, I promise. Just trust me." She quickly packed a small bag with what little they had left, then grabbed Luca's hand. The man led them through the back door and into the cold, rainy night. The streets were quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the raindrops falling on the pavement. The man walked briskly, never looking back. Lucy could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was it. There was no turning back. They walked for what felt like hours, passing through dark alleys and quiet streets, the only source of light coming from the occasional street lamp. Every step felt like a countdown, as if they were racing against time. Finally, they reached a car, a sleek black sedan parked near the curb. The man opened the door and motioned for them to get inside. "Get in," he said. "We need to leave now." Lucy hesitated but then climbed into the car, pulling Luca in beside her. The man slid in after them and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life, and they sped off into the night. Lucy glanced out the window, her mind reeling. Was she making the right choice? Had she just put Luca's life in even more danger? But deep down, she knew one thing. They couldn't stay. Alessandro was coming, and they had to move fast. As the car sped down the empty highway, Lucy glanced at the man sitting beside her. She had no idea who he was, or what his intentions were, but she had no choice but to trust him. For Luca's sake, she had to believe he was leading them to safety. The car sped through the night, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a beacon, but Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced at Luca, who had fallen into an uneasy sleep beside her. The road stretched on ahead, the rain still falling relentlessly, but inside the car, it felt eerily still. The man sitting across from her, the one who had led them out of the safe house, had not spoken much since they got in. He was calm, controlled, his eyes always scanning the surroundings, but his silence only fueled Lucy's anxiety. She had no idea who he really was or how he could help them, but he had claimed to be their ticket to safety. They had no choice but to trust him now. "Where are we going?" Lucy finally asked, her voice quiet but firm. The man didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "We're going to a place where you and the boy can stay for a while. It's safe. For now." His tone was neutral, and Lucy couldn't tell if that was reassuring or simply meant to shut her up. She had more questions, but she didn't want to risk pushing him too far. She glanced at Luca again. The boy was still asleep, but his brow furrowed slightly, as if even in his sleep, he knew something was wrong. He had been through so much already. His small body, curled up on the seat, was tense, his innocence seemingly lost in a world that had become increasingly dangerous. How could she explain all of this to him? She had promised him safety, but was she really keeping that promise? "Who are you?" she asked again, her curiosity getting the better of her. The man didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was low, almost too quiet for her to hear over the sound of the car. "I work for people who can protect you," he said, his words measured. "Alessandro has a lot of enemies, and some of those enemies don't want him to get his son back. I'm one of them." Lucy's eyes widened. Was he saying that they were working with the enemy of Alessandro? "You're a rival?" she asked, not fully understanding. "No," the man replied, shaking his head. "Slightly. Not exactly. I'm someone who doesn't want to see innocent people get hurt. That includes you and the boy." Lucy didn't know what to make of that. Was he trustworthy? Was he really someone who could help them? She glanced at Luca once more. He was still asleep, but Lucy could feel the weight of his future pressing down on her. He had no idea what was happening, but she couldn't let him be pulled back into that dangerous world, not after everything he had been through. The car continued down the wet highway, the miles ticking away in silence. Lucy's thoughts raced. They couldn't stay in the cabin for long. They had to keep moving. But where could they go? She didn't have a plan. They had no safe place to go, no one to turn to. She thought of Carmen, her best friend, and wondered if she was all right. Was she still in danger? Was she being watched too? They didn't have answers to any of these questions. All they had was the road ahead of them, and the hope that they could outrun whatever Alessandro had planned. The man driving glanced at Lucy briefly, his eyes momentarily meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Don't worry," he said. "I've got this under control. You just focus on keeping him safe." His words were meant to reassure her, but they only made her more nervous. Could she really trust him? She didn't know. But right now, he was their only option. The rain continued to pour down, the world outside a blur of darkened streets and flashing lights. Lucy felt the pressure in her chest, the weight of the situation threatening to suffocate her. They were being hunted, and she had no idea what to do next. As they drove deeper into the night, the man began to speak again, his voice calm, as if nothing was wrong. "You and the boy are being tracked. Alessandro has people everywhere. He won't stop until he finds you." Lucy's stomach dropped. She had feared this moment. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "What do we do?" Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We keep moving. We stay ahead of him. And we don't stop until you're both safe," the man replied. "I have a place we can hide. It's far away from the city, but we need to get there before it's too late." The tension in Lucy's body was palpable. Every instinct screamed at her to keep running, to find some kind of escape. But where? Where could they go? She wasn't sure how much longer they could outrun Alessandro and his men. But she didn't have a choice. She had to keep fighting. She had to keep Lucas safe. The miles passed in silence, and soon, they left the city behind. The landscape shifted, becoming more rural, the buildings more spread out. The rain had slowed, but the chill in the air remained, biting at Lucy's skin. She glanced at Luca again, still asleep beside her, his small chest rising and falling with every breath. She felt a deep sense of responsibility for him. He had trusted her. He had placed his life in her hands. And she wasn't going to let him down. The car slowed as they approached a small, secluded building on the side of the road. It was nothing fancy, just a simple structure in the middle of nowhere. The man pulled up to the driveway and parked the car. "This is it," he said, turning to Lucy. "You and the boy will be safe here for a while." Lucy nodded, a flicker of hope stirring inside her. Could this really be their chance to escape? Could they finally be safe? She didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't stop fighting. Not now. Not ever. As the car came to a stop in front of the secluded building, Lucy's heart began to race again. They had arrived at what was supposed to be their sanctuary, but something in the air felt off. The rain had stopped, but the unsettling silence that surrounded the place made Lucy uneasy. She glanced over at Luca, who was still fast asleep, his small face relaxed in peaceful innocence. For a moment, Lucy wished she could go back to a time before all of this. The time when her biggest concern was making sure her students understood algebra, when she could focus on her lessons instead of running for their lives. But that life was gone now. There was no going back. She had to keep moving forward. The man driving the car, the one who had helped them escape from the safe house, turned to her. "We'll be safe here," he said, his voice calm but stern. "This place is secure for now, but we need to be cautious." Lucy nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she opened the door. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. The last few days had been a blur of fear, running, and uncertainty. She just wanted to protect Luca, to keep him safe from Alessandro and his dangerous world. As she stepped out of the car, the cold air hit her, and she pulled her coat tighter around herself. She turned to Luca, gently waking him. "We're here, sweetie," she said softly. Luca rubbed his eyes and looked around, confusion in his eyes. "Where are we?" he asked in a small voice. "We're safe now," Lucy reassured him, offering him a small smile. "This is where we'll stay for a while." Luca seemed to accept this, but Lucy could see the fear still lingering in his eyes. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could see that he trusted her. And that trust gave her the strength to keep going. The man led them into the building, and Lucy immediately noticed how quiet it was. The space felt abandoned, almost eerie, and the stark walls made it feel like a place to hide, not a home. "This way," the man said, leading them down a narrow hallway. Lucy followed, glancing at Luca as he held tightly to her hand. They arrived at a small room at the end of the hall, sparsely furnished with only a bed and a small table. The man opened the door and gestured for them to enter. "You'll be safe here for the night," he said. "I'll check in with you in the morning. Stay inside and don't go anywhere." Lucy didn't know if she could trust him, but for now, it was all they had. She stepped inside the room, her eyes scanning the space. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She set Luca down on the bed and pulled the covers over him. "Stay here, Luca," she said softly, her voice gentle but firm. "I'll be right back." She stepped out of the room, leaving Luca to rest. She needed to talk to the man, to find out more about their situation. She found him sitting at a small desk near the hallway, his eyes focused on something in front of him. "What happens now?" Lucy asked, her voice tight with worry. The man looked up at her, his face expressionless. "We wait," he replied. "Alessandro will come looking for you. He won't stop until he has Luca. But for now, this is the safest place you can be." Lucy's stomach twisted at the mention of Alessandro's name. She had no idea how long they could hide, or if they could ever be truly safe. "And you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What about you? Who are you really?" The man didn't answer immediately. He stood up, his face cold, and walked toward the window, staring out at the empty yard outside. "I told you," he said quietly. "I'm here to help. I'm one of the few who wants to see Alessandro fall. But that doesn't mean I can promise you anything. The world he's a part of doesn't give second chances." Lucy felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't sure what to believe, but one thing was clear. They were in deeper than she ever could have imagined. She was in a fight she never asked for, and the only thing she knew for sure was that she couldn't let Luca go back to that world. "We can't just wait," she said, her voice low but determined. "I won't sit here and wait for them to come for us." The man turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tense. "You think you can outrun Alessandro? He has eyes everywhere. If you make the wrong move, you'll put yourself and Luca in even more danger. The best thing you can do is stay hidden until the right moment. And when that moment comes, we'll be ready." Lucy took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She hated the idea of being a sitting duck, waiting for something to happen. But she had no choice. She had to trust this man, even if she didn't fully understand his motivations. For Luca's sake, she would do whatever it took to survive. The silence in the room stretched on, and Lucy's mind raced with the endless possibilities of what could happen next. What would Alessandro do? How far would he go to get Luca back? The answers were uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. Lucy sat at the small table in the dimly lit room, her hands trembling as she stared at the empty coffee cup in front of her. The world outside was quiet now, the rain having stopped, but the silence inside the cabin was suffocating. The weight of everything that had happened, the running, the hiding, the constant fear, was starting to settle in her chest. Luca was asleep in the other room, his soft breathing the only sound breaking the stillness. She had promised him safety, but how could she keep that promise when everything seemed so uncertain? Alessandro was out there, somewhere, and he wouldn't stop until he found his son. She knew that. It was just a matter of time before his men found their trail, and they'd have nowhere to run. The man who had helped them, whose identity she still wasn't entirely sure of, hadn't spoken much since they arrived. He had assured her they were safe for now, but Lucy wasn't convinced. She needed answers, but every time she tried to ask him more, he deflected her questions. "You need to trust me," he had said. But trust was in short supply these days. Every instinct in her screamed to question him, to demand more, but a part of her knew that she didn't have the luxury of time. They needed to lay low, to disappear. If they didn't, they would be caught. "What happens next?" she asked, breaking the silence. The man, who was sitting across from her at the table, looked up. His eyes were sharp, assessing. He didn't answer right away, instead standing up and walking toward the small window, peering outside as though scanning for any sign of movement. After a moment, he turned back to her. "Next, we wait," he said flatly. "We wait until the right moment to make our move." "And how long will that be?" Lucy asked, her voice strained with frustration. "How do we know when it's safe to move again?" The man didn't seem fazed by her questions. He had a calmness about him that only made Lucy more anxious. "You'll know," he replied. "When the time comes, you'll know. But until then, you stay here. Stay out of sight. Don't take any chances. And what if it's too late by then?" Lucy's voice was soft, but there was an edge too. She couldn't just sit around and wait for Alessandro to come for them. She had to act, had to do something. "You're thinking too much. Don't let fear make the decisions for you." He said it without anger, almost as if he were giving her a lesson. "Fear is what will get you killed in this world. If you panic, you'll make mistakes." Lucy's eyes flashed with frustration. "I'm not panicking. I'm trying to figure out how to protect my son." The man regarded her quietly, then nodded. "I understand. But understand this. You won't protect him if you act recklessly. You'll only lead them straight to him." Lucy swallowed hard. He was right. But the idea of sitting back and doing nothing felt impossible. Every minute that passed was one more minute Alessandro could use to track them down. "Then what am I supposed to do?" she asked. The man stepped closer, his expression serious. "You wait, and you stay hidden, until I get the signal. Then we move. We'll go to a place where they can't find us." Lucy wanted to argue, but the truth was, she had no plan of her own. She was relying on him now, on his knowledge of the situation. She had no choice. "Okay," she said finally, her voice quiet. "But what if the signal never comes?" He looked at her, and for the first time, Lucy saw something like empathy in his eyes. "It will come. I have people working on this. We'll get you both to safety." She nodded, though doubt still churned in her mind. "And Luca?" she asked, her voice softening as she thought about the boy. "What happens to him?" "He's safer with you than anywhere else right now," the man replied. "You're all he has. You'll protect him. That's the most important thing." Lucy looked down at the table, her mind racing. How could she protect him when she was so terrified herself? How could she keep him safe when every step they took seemed to bring them closer to danger? The thought of Alessandro's men tracking them down, of Luca being dragged back into that dark world, made her stomach twist with fear. But she couldn't show it. Not in front of Luca. Not when he was depending on her. She stood up, her resolve hardening. "I'll protect him," she said, more to herself. Then to the man. "I don't care what it takes. I'll protect him." The man gave her a small nod of approval, but his eyes were hard, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said. "Then get some rest. You'll need it." Lucy didn't argue. She knew he was right. She had to keep her strength up if she was going to keep Lucas safe. But sleep was elusive. The thought of Alessandro's reach, of the danger that was closing in on them, kept her awake. Hours passed, the silence in the cabin broken only by the sound of the wind outside. She kept glancing at Luca, still sleeping soundly on the bed. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that they might make it through this, that they might find a way to outrun the storm. But in the back of her mind, she knew better. This was just the calm before the storm. And when the storm hit, she would have to be ready. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the cabin's windows, but Lucy didn't feel the warmth it promised. She sat at the small table, staring at the wall, her thoughts racing. The storm had passed, but the fear still lingered. Alessandro's men could be anywhere. She knew that even though they were hidden for now, the clock was ticking. It wasn't a matter of if they'd find her, it was when. She had tried to push those thoughts out of her mind before, but they kept creeping in, gnawing at her peace. She glanced at Luca, who was playing quietly in the corner of the room, his innocence and trust in her offering some comfort, but also deepening the guilt she felt. He shouldn't be in this situation. He should have been safe, playing with other children, going to school, not running from mafia men. She couldn't let him go back to that life. The silence in the cabin was thick, almost suffocating. Lucy knew they couldn't stay here for long. She had heard what the man had said last night about waiting for the right moment. But how could she just sit and do nothing? She wasn't a passive person. She needed to be proactive. She had to find a way out of this, her way. She stood up, her resolve firming. The plan that had been put in place wasn't going to be enough. They had to leave, they had to keep moving, and they had to find a place where Alessandro's reach couldn't touch them. She walked over to Luca, who was stacking some blocks, completely unaware of the heavy thoughts that clouded her mind. She sat next to him and gently brushed his hair out of his face. "Luca, we have to get ready to leave soon," she said softly. Luca looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. "Where are we going, Mom?" Lucy felt her heart break at the word. She wasn't his mother, but he had come to see her that way. He had trusted her with his life, and that responsibility weighed on her more than anything else. "We're going to a place where you'll be safe, I promise," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca nodded slowly, still not fully understanding, but trusting her all the same. She had to make sure they left before it was too late. "We have to be quiet. No one can know we're leaving." As Lucy gathered their belongings, she couldn't help but glance at the window, her eyes searching the trees just beyond the cabin. Her gut told her that something was wrong, that they were being watched. She pushed the thought away. She couldn't afford to panic. She needed to stay focused. She quickly packed a small bag with the essentials, clothes, food, and the small amount of money she had left. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. When she finished, she went to check on the man who had been their protector. He was sitting by the door, staring out the window. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his posture that set Lucy on edge. "It's time," she said. The man nodded without speaking and stood up. "We'll move quickly. Stick to the plan," he said, his voice calm. But Lucy could see the hint of urgency in his eyes. He wasn't as confident as he seemed. The uncertainty in his gaze made her stomach tighten. They walked out of the cabin, and for a moment, the quiet of the forest surrounded them. The air was cool, and the forest felt peaceful, almost deceptive in its calm. Lucy kept her eyes on the path ahead, every step feeling like a countdown to something she couldn't control. She glanced at Luca, who was holding her hand, looking up at her with trust-filled eyes. "Stay close to me, okay?" she said softly. Luca nodded, squeezing her hand tighter. "I'm not going anywhere, Mom." The words stung, but Lucy forced a smile. They kept walking, moving as quickly as they could without drawing attention. The man led the way, his movements swift but measured, clearly on high alert. They passed through the trees, moving quietly, the weight of their escape pressing down on Lucy. She kept glancing over her shoulder, convinced someone might be behind them. She couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that they were being tracked. They reached a clearing and stopped at the edge of a small stream. The man turned to Lucy, his face serious. "We'll cross here. It'll take us further from the cabin, further from anyone who might be looking for us." Lucy nodded, though the nagging feeling in her gut didn't go away. She had never been one to let fear dictate her actions, but now, with Luca in tow, every instinct screamed at her to protect him. They crossed the stream, the cold water rushing past their ankles. The air felt heavier as they moved, as if the world was holding its breath. When they reached the other side, the man stopped again, scanning the area. He motioned for them to follow him into the woods. "We need to keep moving." "Stay close," he said. The woods were dense, and Lucy felt disoriented, as though they were walking deeper into a maze. But she trusted this man, even if she wasn't sure who he really was or what his intentions were. He had helped them so far. She had to believe he would continue to help. But as they moved deeper into the forest, Lucy couldn't ignore the voice in her head. Something wasn't right. She quickened her pace, urging Luca to keep up. Suddenly, the man stopped. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice urgent. "There's someone ahead." Stay low. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. She crouched down, pulling Luca close. Don't make a sound, she whispered to him. They huddled together in the underbrush, hidden from sight. Lucy's breath was shallow, her chest tight with fear. Her heart pounded in her ears as they waited, every second feeling like an eternity. She had to make sure they were safe. She couldn't let them be found now. The sounds of the forest were deafening, the rain beginning to fall harder as Lucy crouched low, her heart thudding in her chest. They were only a few feet away from the clearing when the man stopped them, signaling for silence. Lucy's breath hitched, her nerves on edge as she tried to peer through the thick foliage. Luca, sensing the tension, pressed closer to her, his small hand clutching hers tightly. They waited, every second stretching out into eternity. The sounds of footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, but they weren't alone. Lucy's heart skipped a beat, and she could feel a rising panic as the reality of their situation set in. Alessandro's men were close, too close. The man who had been helping them gave a slight nod, signaling for them to move quietly. He turned swiftly, leading them through the dense underbrush, urging them to stay low to the ground. Lucy's mind raced. What if they were caught? What if Luca was taken right from under her protection? She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let that happen. They moved as fast as they could through the woods, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves and the constant rush of rain. Every few moments, the man would pause, his eyes scanning the surroundings with an almost predatory intensity. It was as if he could feel the danger, too. Lucy's pulse quickened with every passing moment. She glanced down at Luca, who was still holding her hand, his face pale with fear, but his step steady. He trusted her. That trust kept her moving forward, kept her pushing past the fear that threatened to swallow her. She had to get him to safety. They couldn't afford to stop now. They continued deeper into the woods, following the man's lead. The trees grew denser, the path less clear, and the forest seemed to close in around them. Lucy's mind was spinning with questions. Who was this man? Was he really their ally? Was there anyone they could trust anymore? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp motion from the man ahead. He stopped abruptly and signaled for them to do the same. They froze, crouching low behind a large tree, holding their breath. There, not far from where they stood, a group of Alessandro's men was moving through the woods. Lucy could see them clearly now, their dark silhouettes moving in tight formation. They were searching for them. Lucy felt a wave of dread wash over her. They were so close. Too close. The man beside her whispered, his voice low and tense. Stay down. Stay quiet. Don't make a sound. His words were a command, not a suggestion. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, as the men passed by, completely unaware of their presence. The tension in Lucy's body was unbearable as the group of men moved out of sight. For a moment, the world stood still, the silence almost as heavy as the rain. She waited, watching as the man led them forward once again. They had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of the danger. The man moved with purpose, his steps quick and sure, but Lucy's fear didn't fade. Every second felt like a race against time. It wasn't long before they reached a small cabin hidden deep within the forest. The man knocked on the door in a series of quick, deliberate raps. They waited in silence, the sound of the rain falling steadily around them. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing another man standing inside. They're close, the man who had been helping them said, his voice urgent. We need to move. Lucy's heart raced. She wasn't sure what to expect, but as she stepped into the cabin, she felt a slight sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was inside, out of the elements, and away from Alessandro's men. The cabin was small, but it was warm and dry, and the quiet seemed to wrap around her like a blanket. Stay here, the man said, looking at Lucy and Luca. I'll take care of things. You're safe for now. Lucy nodded, though doubt still gnawed at her. How long would this safety last? How long before they were on the run again? But for the moment, they were safe. She turned to Luca, who had been quiet for the last few moments, his eyes wide as he took in his new surroundings. We're safe, Luca, Lucy whispered, crouching down to his level. I promise. Luca nodded slowly, but the fear in his eyes hadn't entirely disappeared. What happens now? He asked softly. Lucy felt her heart twist. She wished she had an answer. Now, we wait, she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty inside her. And when it's time, we'll go. We'll keep going, no matter what. As she sat down on the bed, her mind raced. They were safe for now, but for how long? She knew Alessandro wouldn't stop until he found them, until he took Luca back. But she wouldn't let that happen. She would keep fighting, keep running, no matter where it led. She would protect Luca with everything she had. This wasn't over yet. The storm had passed, but the real battle was just beginning. In this gripping dark romance story, a young teacher finds herself thrust into a dangerous world of betrayal, mafia power, and unthinkable choices when she becomes the unexpected guardian of a child fleeing from his notorious father. As she struggles to protect the innocent boy, the dark romance of their journey unfolds, showing the depths of her devotion and the terrifying power of the man who will stop at nothing to reclaim his son. This dark romance weaves a complex tale of love, trust, and survival, as the teacher fights against time and enemies who close in on them. With every step they take, the stakes rise higher, and the line between right and wrong blurs. As their perilous journey continues, Lucy discovers more about her feelings for the boy's father and the dangerous allure of the mafia boss. In this tense dark romance, trust is tested, hearts are broken, and love is a battlefield. The story keeps readers on the edge of their seat, exploring themes of loyalty, betrayal, and the dark side of desire. With twists and turns that keep the tension high, this dark romance will keep you hooked until the very end. Can love and survival coexist in such a ruthless world, or will the dark romance they share lead to destruction? Find out as their story unfolds in this suspense-filled dark romance.